May 28, 1940, Reich Air Ministry, Berlin. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring placed the latest intelligence report on his desk with visible disdain. The document summarized President Roosevelt's request to Congress for an extraordinary expansion of U.S. aircraft production, an ambitious goal of building 50,000 planes a year. The Americans must be desperate if they think such propaganda will scare us, Göring told his staff. They understand nothing about wartime production. Let them try converting their car factories. They'll soon discover that building airplanes is far more complex than assembling automobiles. What Göring failed to understand was that in Detroit, a Danish-born industrialist named William Knudsen was already proving him wrong. The former General Motors president, now serving for just $1 a year as Roosevelt's production chief, was leading the most extensive industrial transformation in history. Within 4 years, American factories would exceed expectations, producing not 50,000 but nearly 100,000 aircraft annually, while simultaneously supplying 2 distant war fronts across the Atlantic and Pacific. The announcement that had provoked German ridicule came on May 16, 1940, as German panzer divisions swept through France. Standing before Congress, Roosevelt declared, "I should like to see this nation equipped to produce at least 50,000 planes a year." Even among allies, the reaction was skeptical. In 1939, the United States had built just 3,611 military aircraft. The Army Air Corps owned only 1,700 combat planes, many outdated. Yet Roosevelt demanded a 14-fold increase in production. William Knudsen became the key architect of this manufacturing miracle. When asked who could accomplish such an impossible task, Presidential advisor Bernard Baruch famously replied, "First, Bill Knudsen. Second, Bill Knudsen. Third, Bill Knudsen." Knudsen left his $300,000 a year corporate salary to serve his adopted country, applying automotive mass production techniques to aircraft manufacturing. The transformation began immediately. By December 1941, U.S. factories were producing 2,000 military planes per month, a 20-fold rise in just 2 years. Ford Motor Company announced plans for a massive bomber plant at Willow Run, Michigan. Boeing expanded its Seattle operations. Douglas Aircraft hired thousands. The arsenal of democracy was coming to life. Germany's dismissal of U.S. industry came from racial prejudice and deliberate ignorance. General Friedrich von Boeticher, the Wehrmacht's military attaché in Washington, 1933 to 1941, sent accurate reports about America's industrial mobilization. In December 1940, he warned Berlin, American war production will reach unimaginable levels. These warnings were ignored as defeatist. When Boeticher met Hitler in 1939 to discuss American potential, the Führer ranted about racial inferiority instead of listening to facts. Hitler called Americans half Judaized, half Negro, claiming they were incapable of sustained warfare, an ideological blindness that proved fatal. This prejudice reached all levels. Luftwaffe intelligence dismissed reports of women working in aircraft plants as signs of U.S. weakness. They couldn't imagine that democratic mobilization could surpass totalitarian command. Even reports of factories operating 3 shifts were labeled exaggerations. The Nazi worldview simply couldn't comprehend the American industrial reality. Ford's Willow Run plant became the ultimate symbol of that reality. Built on farmland starting April 18, 1941, it became the world's largest factory under one roof, 3.5 million square feet, with an assembly line stretching 1 mile. Charles Sorensen, Ford's production chief, promised to build 1 B-24 Liberator bomber per hour, while others managed just 1 per day. Initial results were poor. The first bomber, completed in September 1942, had to be completely rebuilt. Quality failures reached 50%. By February 1943, Willow Run produced only 56 bombers a month, far below expectations. Critics mockingly called it, "Will it run?" Yet Ford engineers persevered, dividing the B-24's 488,193 parts into smaller sub-assemblies. They introduced hydraulic riveting tools, prefabricated wiring systems, and continuously moving assembly lines. In 1943 alone, engineers handled 578 design changes while maintaining production. By September, output reached 148 bombers monthly. By December, 365. The turning point came in April 1944, when Willow Run delivered 428 B-24s, one every 63 minutes, operating around the clock. That single plant outproduced Germany's entire aviation industry. German pilots began noticing America's overwhelming output during the Tunisia campaign. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commander of JG-77, remarked in December 1942, "The American pilots are no longer amateurs, and there seem to be more of them every day." By January 27, 1943, the first U.S. bombing raid struck Germany itself, targeting Wilhelmshaven. Later that year, on Black Thursday, over Schweinfurt, the U.S. lost 60 B-17s, yet replaced them within 2 weeks. The industrial mathematics were undeniable. During Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, the U.S. 8th and 15th Air Forces launched 3,500 bomber sorties against German aircraft factories. The Luftwaffe lost up to 355 fighters and nearly 100 veteran pilots. General Adolf Galland reported to Göring that Germany was losing 1,200 fighters monthly, but producing only 1,000. In contrast, the U.S. produced 2,500 fighters a month while losing 400. Major Heinz Bahr, a top German ace with 220 victories, described a 1944 mission over Brunswick. The bomber stream stretched from horizon to horizon, at least 700 flying fortresses and liberators. We were 8 fighters against hundreds. It was hopeless. By 1944, American aircraft production reached astonishing levels. 96,270 planes in 1 year, including 16,048 heavy bombers, 35,743 fighters, and 22,591 twin-engine aircraft. That single year exceeded Germany's total wartime output of 94,677 planes. The disparity wasn't only in numbers. Each American bomber carried 13.50 caliber machine guns with ample ammunition, while German fighters often launched with partial loads. U.S. bombers had powered turrets, advanced bomb sights, and navigation gear. German aircraft often lacked functioning radios. By May 1944, Boeing's Seattle Plant 2 was producing 16 B-17s daily. Douglas Aircraft grew from 68 employees in 1936 to 167,000 across 9 facilities. North American Aviation built 500 P-51 Mustangs per month, and Lockheed produced 1 P-38 Lightning every 90 minutes, integrating over 2,000 field-driven improvements. Supporting industries matched the scale. General Motors built 57,658 aircraft engines, Packard produced 55,523 Rolls-Royce Merlins, Alcoa's aluminum output grew 600%, and Dow Chemical's magnesium production soared from 6 million to 333 million pounds annually. America's workforce transformation defied all Nazi assumptions. Women, who made up less than 1% of aircraft workers in 1941, comprised 65% by 1943, over 310,000 in total. At Douglas Long Beach, women filled more than half of all positions. Roswell Monroe, the original Rosie the Riveter, drove 3,000 rivets per shift at Willow Run with 99.5% accuracy. Women inspectors reduced defects from 3.2% to 0.3%. Ford redesigned tools for smaller hands, unintentionally improving efficiency. Lightweight pneumatic tools reduced fatigue, and better workstation layouts cut injuries. German intelligence misread this mobilization as desperation. In reality, it marked the dawn of a new industrial and social era, one that would define the outcome of the war. German intelligence reports dismissed these new female workers as a temporary measure, predicting a decline in quality. Instead, precision improved significantly. Women excelled in detailed tasks, wiring, instrument assembly, and inspection. Their participation reflected democratic strength, not weakness. As American production accelerated, Germany retreated further into illusion. In February 1944, Göring approved the Jaeger program, dispersing aircraft manufacturing into 729 underground sites powered by forced labor. The Mittelwerk complex alone employed around 60,000 prisoners under horrific conditions, where roughly 20,000 died. These underground facilities produced more defects than aircraft. Sabotage was common, and moving parts between scattered sites caused constant delays. Quality control collapsed completely. At its peak, the entire middlework system produced fewer engines per month than Ford's Chicago plant alone. Meanwhile, American innovation continued to advance. Boeing developed modular B-29 production across 4 plants, using completely interchangeable components. The pressurized B-29, costing about $65,000 each, incorporated technology Germany had not yet achieved even in prototypes. By early 1945, the U.S. was building 100 B-29s every month. June 6, 1944, D-Day, demonstrated the full power of this industrial dominance. The invasion employed 11,590 Allied aircraft against 319 German sorties, a ratio of 36-1. This was not simply tactical superiority, it represented complete industrial domination. Between January and May 1944, preparatory bombings dropped 145,000 tons of explosives on German targets, exceeding the total tonnage Germany had dropped on Britain during the entire war. Transport planes delivered 3 airborne divisions in one day using more aircraft than Germany's entire transport fleet ever possessed. By December 1944, single raids involved 1,200 bombers escorted by 900 fighters. The P-51 Mustang had the range to reach Poland, the performance to rival any German fighter, and existed in such vast numbers that losses no longer mattered. German pilots referred to them as Indians, describing how they appeared everywhere at once. As defeat approached, even Nazi leaders began to recognize the production disaster. In December 1944, Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary, "Göring's promises about Luftwaffe's superiority now seem criminally delusional. We are fighting the world's greatest industrial power with rhetoric." Field Marshal Rommel warned before D-Day, "The Americans can lose 10 tanks for every one we destroy and still overwhelm us. When they land, they will come with such material superiority that no position can hold." Even Hitler later admitted to Albert Speer in January 1945, "We should have listened to Boetticher's reports. Their industrial capacity was decisive. While we built hundreds, they built tens of thousands." Albert Speer later testified that American bombing reduced German output by 35% for tanks, 31% for aircraft, and 42% for trucks. He stated clearly that the systematic American campaign against industrial targets caused the collapse of German armament production. Germany's Me-262 jet fighter, which became operational in mid-1944, represented real innovation, about 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft. Hitler and Göring believed this miracle weapon could restore air superiority despite being outnumbered. But Germany built only 1,430 Me-262s, with no more than 200 operational at a time. Engines required overhauls every 10 hours, and shortages of critical materials forced the use of inferior substitutes. Meanwhile, the United States had begun jet development as early as 1942. The Bell P-59 underperformed, but Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, superior to any German jet, entered production before the war ended. America's deep industrial base allowed simultaneous pursuit of multiple technologies, something Germany simply could not sustain. This contrast defined the outcome of the production war. Germany's technological advances meant little against America's capacity to build thousands of conventional fighters while still developing next-generation aircraft. In total war, quality without quantity was meaningless. Hermann Göring's arrest on May 8, 1945, by soldiers of the U.S. 36th Infantry Division, marked the start of his confrontation with reality. Initially defiant during interrogation in Augsburg, he insisted that German technology had been superior and was defeated only by overwhelming numbers. Transferred later to Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, a holding facility for top Nazi officials, Göring underwent detailed questioning. In July 1945, Major Kenneth Heckler conducted extensive interviews documenting Göring's gradual acknowledgement of American industrial superiority. "I knew American industrial capacity was immense," Göring admitted, "but its execution exceeded my worst fears. That single factory at Willow Run produced more aircraft than our entire bomber force at its peak. It was beyond comprehension. He expressed particular astonishment at U.S. logistics. Your ability to supply forces across 2 oceans while maintaining domestic production was beyond anything we imagined. We couldn't sustain forces 500 miles from Germany. You supplied armies 5,000 miles from home. At the Nuremberg trials, prosecutors presented Göring with undeniable evidence of U.S. industrial dominance. Charts showed that by 1944, America produced more aircraft monthly than Germany built in an entire year. Films of Willow Run's assembly lines played as prosecutors listed the German cities destroyed by bombers made in that single plant. During his March 14, 1946 testimony, Göring admitted his failure to grasp the scale of American mobilization. I always believed the United States had great industrial and technical potential, especially in aviation. But I never thought they could expand aircraft production 100-fold in 4 years. Such growth seemed physically impossible. Prison psychologist Dr. G. M. Gilbert later recorded Göring's fixation with production statistics. He repeatedly compared American factory output to all of Germany's combined production, especially obsessed with Willow Run, calling it, "that damned factory that broke our backs." When shown the figures, 812,615 aircraft engines built by the U.S. versus 241,675 by Germany, Göring reportedly sat in silence, unable to respond. The mathematical truth of defeat was inescapable. The transformation remains staggering even today. From 3,611 military aircraft in 1940, America's total production reached 295,959 by 1945, including 97,810 bombers, 99,465 fighters, and 98,684 other aircraft. This reflected not just immense quantity, but systemic superiority across every level of production. At peak, 2 million Americans worked in the aircraft industry, representing unprecedented diversity. Women, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, disabled workers, teenagers, and the elderly. This democratic mobilization achieved what authoritarian command could not: voluntary cooperation that far outperformed forced labor. The workforce that entered the factories in 1941, largely untrained, emerged by 1945 as the most skilled aviation labor force in the world. They didn't merely build planes, they revolutionized manufacturing itself. Statistical quality control, developed for bomber production, became standard across global industry. Automation techniques pioneered at Willow Run transformed post-war production methods. The engineers who once designed bomber assembly lines would go on to design the Saturn V rocket. The women who riveted B-24s raised children who would one day walk on the moon. The wartime production miracle did not end with victory, it launched the American century. Financially, the scale was unprecedented. Aircraft production alone cost $45 billion in 1940s dollars, roughly $800 billion today. The B-29 program itself exceeded the cost of the Manhattan Project. Yet rather than bankrupting the nation, war production created unmatched prosperity. Unemployment, a defining problem of the Depression, vanished completely. Personal income doubled between 1940 and 1945. Workers themselves financed much of this expansion through war bond purchases. Willow Run employees alone bought $45 million in bonds, funding the very plant they worked in. By 1944, Germany had devoted nearly 40% of its total industrial output to aircraft production, yet still produced less than half of what America achieved. The regime's increasing dependence on forced labor proved disastrously ineffective. Sabotage became widespread, quality plummeted, and productivity per worker actually declined after 1943, while American efficiency surged by 300%. The industrial network built for war became the foundation of post-war prosperity. Aluminum plants that once made bomber frames later supplied material for suburban housing. Chemical factories that refined aviation fuel turned to producing plastics for everyday use. Machine tool manufacturers that supplied aircraft plants retooled American industry for worldwide dominance. Beyond raw output, organizational skill played a decisive role. The War Production Board coordinated 184,000 companies with precision. IBM punch card systems tracked millions of components across countless suppliers. At MIT's Radiation Laboratory, 4,000 scientists developed advanced navigation systems that gave U.S. bombers all-weather capability. When combat revealed the B-17's vulnerability to frontal attacks, Boeing added chin turrets in just 60 days. When Pacific operations demanded greater range, Consolidated modified the B-24s without halting production. German alterations, in contrast, often took months or years. America's rapid adaptability proved as critical as its vast production volume. American aircraft evolved continuously, shaped by lessons from global combat. Information from Pacific battlefields reached Atlantic assembly lines within days. German aircraft, built in underground factories by slave labor, remained unchanged, while American designs improved weekly. This feedback loop between combat and production reached an unprecedented level of efficiency. Pilots' reports reached engineers immediately. Engineers' innovations reached factories within days. Factory workers' suggestions reached designers directly. This open exchange of ideas proved far superior to Germany's rigid, top-down command system. On October 15, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring wrote his final letter. In it, he admitted the true reason for Germany's defeat. The Americans won through industrial power, not military skill. We were beaten not by better soldiers, but by better factories. The nation we mocked for making consumer goods buried us under aluminum and steel. His last words to psychologist Gustav Gilbert were equally revealing. We declared war on a sleeping industrial giant. When it awoke, we were doomed. They didn't just outproduce us, they reinvented production itself. That night, Göring took his own life, but his final confession stands as history's verdict on the war of production. The Luftwaffe's marshal, who had once dismissed American capability, died knowing a single U.S. factory had outproduced his entire Air Force's lifetime output. Military historians widely agree, America's production power was the decisive factor in Allied victory. Without it, D-Day would have been impossible, the bombing campaign unsustainable, and the Pacific War unwinnable. Air War historian Richard Overy summarized it best: the outcome was determined not by fighting spirit or tactical brilliance, but by the weight of material. The Allies prevailed by overwhelming their enemies with sheer production. The numbers confirm it. By 1944, the United States alone built more military aircraft than the rest of the world combined, Axis and Allies together. This wasn't a small advantage, but a total industrial domination. Germany didn't just lose, it was obliterated. Yet, the meaning of this achievement went beyond military success. It demonstrated democracy's strength over dictatorship, freedom's superiority to tyranny, and the power of voluntary cooperation over forced obedience. The workers who made it happen were not slaves but free citizens united by purpose. Göring's arrogance toward American industry remains one of history's greatest miscalculations. His contempt for democratic production cost Germany the war and millions of lives. His failure to understand America's potential doomed the Third Reich long before the first bomber reached its skies. The transformation from 3,000 to 100,000 aircraft per year proved that free societies, when threatened, could accomplish the impossible. American workers didn't just meet Roosevelt's ambitious target, they doubled it. They didn't just equal German output, they exceeded it fivefold, while fighting a two-ocean war. Modern leaders would be wise to remember Göring's error. Underestimating free nations because they value peace, or doubting their productivity because they prefer prosperity over conquest, is a dangerous mistake. In 1940, America seemed unprepared for war. By 1944, it had become an unstoppable industrial powerhouse. The arsenal of democracy proved that production lines could decide wars as surely as front lines, that factory workers could be as vital as soldiers, and that industrial mobilization could secure victory as effectively as battlefield strategy. Göring learned that truth too late, and at the cost of his nation's destruction. From his scornful reaction to Roosevelt's 1940 announcement to his death at Nuremberg in 1946, his story mirrors Nazi Germany's downfall. His contempt for American manufacturing became the epitaph of the Third Reich, a regime that mistook ideology for competence and believed racial myth could overpower industrial mathematics. The Luftwaffe's marshal, who mocked American factories, died knowing those same factories produced more aircraft in 1944 alone than Germany built in the entire war. His ridicule of democratic industry became the most expensive joke in history, paid for in total defeat. America built 295,959 military aircraft. Germany built 94,677. But victory was about more than numbers. It proved that free labor could outperform slavery, that democratic teamwork could outdo totalitarian command, and that a diverse nation could unite to achieve greatness. The B-24 bombers rolling off Willow Run every 63 minutes weren't just machines, they were democracy's reply to tyranny. Each rivet was driven by a woman who'd been a homemaker months before, each engine by a teenager who left school to serve, each wing by immigrants escaping hardship. Together, they proved that a free people, united in a just cause, could bury tyranny beneath an avalanche of production. Göring once laughed at America's goal of 50,000 planes a year. America answered by building twice that number, and reshaping world history. His laughter now echoes through time as the sound of fatal misjudgment, the downfall of a man who neither understood democracy nor the power of free production. In the end, both crushed him, and everything he stood for, beneath 300,000 American aircraft, the engines of history's most complete defeat.